Hello, saints and scholars. Welcome back to Theo Life with me, Patrick Stitt, where today we begin a new course in cross-cultural apologetics. Let's break down what we mean when we say cross-cultural apologetics. Apologetics is the defense of the Christian faith. What apologetics usually does is take things we all tend to agree are reliable, things like history, science, and philosophy, and they use those tools to make a defense of the Christian faith. The idea behind apologetics is to show that Christianity is intellectually viable and one would make the right intellectual choice in believing in Christianity. Apologetics tries to create an intellectual framework that provides a defense for Christianity. And today, millions of people are becoming Christian because of the incredible work of apologists. Now, apologetics can be used to encourage Christians to be more excited about their faith. It's so exciting! We as Christians get to look at the historical world, archaeological discoveries and scientific discoveries and find the fingerprints of God Himself all over these wonderful sciences. But another goal of apologetics is to show people that do not believe in Christianity because they have intellectual objections, that those intellectual objections have solid answers. This is a really fun and exciting process for those who like to be a part of evangelical work. But it's important when we present these things to present them in the best way possible. It's not enough just to be accurate. You've got to speak in a way that people will understand and receive your beliefs. The truth is, if all we needed was facts and information, nobody would smoke and nobody would eat at McDonald's. It's not just what we say, it's how we say it if it's going to be well received. Apologetics as an art tends to be focused in the arena of debate and argument and conflicting ideas, which is a very exciting arena to exist. But the problem is, there's certain cultures out there that don't really like debate. Certain people think that argument is kind of unseemly, and people really dislike conversations about religion in some cultures. Now, if you want to be a great evangelist, you have to bear in mind the cultural concerns of the groups to whom you're speaking. St. Paul tells us that he became all things to all men that he might win one.
And though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings.
He bore in mind that he had to transform his approach based on the different cultures. Given that, this course is going to attempt to address the cultural concerns of various groups so that we can present the arguments in the best possible light. Through this course, we're going to look at three different areas: worldview, views on argumentation, and physiological needs. Let's begin this discussion by addressing worldview. There are various worldviews in the world today that underpin people's beliefs in basically everything. Worldview is not so much a truth, it's the method by which you interpret all the truths in your life. There are various conflicting worldviews that we should look at if we're going to understand how to best communicate the Christian message to other people. One such divide is individualistic cultures versus collectivist cultures. Individualist cultures emphasize personal freedom, self-reliance, and individual rights, where collectivist cultures prioritize group harmony, community, and the group over individual desires. If you're from the good old US of A or somewhere like Western Europe, you are very focused on your individual rights, your right to express yourself without the need to concern yourself with the thoughts of others. But if you live where I live, like Japan or China, you constantly have to be thinking, what do other people think about your behavior right now? Where people in the West might value being real and being true to yourself, people in the East will value being part of a community as the highest value. Let's say you're sharing your faith in a collectivist culture. And a member of this culture will ask you a tough question. My ancestors died without ever hearing the Christian message. Did they go to heaven or to hell? Now, if you say they went to heaven, the person might say, well, that's fine. If they got to go to heaven without believing in Jesus, then I'll go to heaven without believing in Jesus. If you say they went to hell, then the person might say, well, then that's where I want to go, because if that's what my community and my collective is, it would be hell to be separated from my collective and community. So even though I'm suffering, I still want to be with my community. This might seem crazy to a individualistic culture, but that is genuinely the foundational belief of many collectivist peoples. You might be part of a pluralistic society where you've got some people in the family who are Christian, some who are atheist, some who are Buddhist, and some that are going to change their religion next week. This is seen as perfectly acceptable because, hey, you do whatever you want. But in a collectivist culture, they see them all doing the same thing as the foundation of their community. If the community is a Buddhist community, then being part of that community depends on you behaving like everyone else in the community. So if you were to change your religion, you are stepping out of the collective, which is possibly the most terrifying thing you can do. But let's bring it down even to another level. Let's say you're serving overseas and you encounter some Mormon missionaries. Those happy little chappies with their spiffy neckties and name tags, which tell a 19-year-old kid that they're elder something. I don't think they really know what the word elder means. It's very common for evangelicals and Mormons to start to debate each other. Before you debate this 19-year-old Mormon teenager, you need to ask yourself, what are you asking the Mormon to give up? Bear in mind that this wonderful Mormon young man comes from a wonderful Mormon family, has spent his entire life going to his happy Mormon church where they read from the scriptures and they encourage each other and they love each other. All of his brothers and sisters and moms and aunts and uncles and grandparents and friends are all Mormons. His entire community and framework for existence is built within this community. And all of that community scrimped and saved and borrowed and worked incredibly hard so they could send this young man on a 2-year mission where he could be a pioneer for his faith. His parents are praying for him, they're believing in him, they're caring about him, and they really want him to do great work while he is overseas. Now imagine for a minute you would ask that young person to abandon that faith, abandon that community, abandon the hopes and dreams of the parents, kind of spit in their eye a little bit with the huge money that they have spent, to ask that person to leave that community and enter into your community. You're asking them to break their mother's heart, to go against tradition, to go against their entire worldview and cause so much social disunity within their own life so that they can change religions. This is not just a worldview question, this is foundational to our identity. Changing religions is not just a doctrinal issue or a philosophical issue, it goes right down to the core of who we are and the very relationships that define us. That is why sharing your faith must bear in mind the huge gravitas that comes between having an individualistic culture and a collectivist culture. Another consideration would be in the difference between cultures that are serious about religion and cultures that are indifferent to religion. Areas like Scandinavia or where I live in Japan, people are just not used to discussing religion. If I ask people here in Japan, do you have a soul, or what happens after you die, they often look at me a little strangely because they've never considered the question. Some of them will be very confused because they don't even know where to begin because it's so outside of any topic they've ever discussed before. Others will actually awkwardly try to change the subject because it's not an area they want to get into.
The whole thing is just awkward.
But if you live in a more serious culture, a place like Saudi Arabia or Indonesia, conversations about religion are incredibly common. You might be cruising down the streets of Jakarta with your tuk-tuk driver, and that tuk-tuk driver might ask you what religion you are and what beliefs you have and what celebrations you get into and why do you have those beliefs.
What religion are you?
This might even sound a little bit intense for some people, but their religion thinks it's a natural good part of daily conversation to discuss people's worldviews. It can often be a lot of fun to discuss theological topics and apologetics in a culture that takes religion very seriously. But if you're working in more of an indifferent culture, they tend to not want to discuss religion directly. But you can discuss things like, what is the meaning of truth? Let's have a conversation about history or archaeology, or what kind of things can we do to improve our relationships and mental health, and bring in a religious perspective on these discussions. So before you begin your discussion, it's important to determine, is your culture indifferent to religion or serious about religion? Third, let's discuss power difference. Power distance is the measurement between a powerful group in society and a less powerful group in society. An example of this would be, how do you interact between educated and uneducated people? In certain cultures, it's perfectly appropriate for young kids to call teachers by their first name and to laugh and make jokes with their teachers and have a good rapport with them. In other cultures, that is grossly inappropriate. You respect your teacher, you call them sir or madam, and you are not there to have a personal fun relationship. You are there to do as you are told and respect their time. In my own native Ireland, we have a very low power difference because we actually don't like people that take themselves too seriously or are always bragging about their accomplishments or lift themselves above other people. Yeah, I know. We have Conor McGregor. We're apologizing for that and we're trying to get past it. But if you take a culture like India, where their entire social structure can actually be separated into various groups that are not supposed to interact with one another and are not supposed to have community with one another, although India is rapidly changing. In a culture with a high power difference, it can often be difficult to express a Christian message because you might be going against authorities within the community that are not supposed to be challenged. If you go to a culture with a low power difference and you stand up behind a pulpit and you're wearing a suit and you give a very ornate and impassioned sermon, it might be quite poorly received because you're putting yourself on an elevated status above your audience that they may not respond well to. These are considerations you have to have when considering the power difference in your cultural context. The next area of consideration is historical context. What issues has your audience had with the church in the past that might color their perception of Christianity? Due to great evils such as colonialism and religious oppression, certain groups associate the church, whether rightly or wrongly, with committing these atrocities. Certain groups will actually not listen to anything the church has to say because they interpret all of the church's beliefs through the medium of historical oppression through others that they have associated with the church. This can be difficult because you personally did not commit any of those atrocities and you may find their committance abhorrent.
The Catholic Church does not make mistakes.
But before you can begin a discussion on evangelicalism or Christian beliefs, you have to rebuild trust within the community and show that you are not associated with the atrocities of the past.
All right. Mistakes were made.
The next area of consideration is social issues. Many people are extremely concerned with how your doctrine will impact the social world around them. A lot of people today are actually completely disinterested in discussions about doctrine, but they're very passionate about social issues. We live in a world where people are constantly inundated with every kind of stupid belief pushed at them all day long from every single medium possible, and it is exhausting. Many people today are not particularly interested in the particulars of what you believe, or what kind of impact your beliefs are going to make on the world. They don't want you to talk about Christianity, they want you to show them what impact Christianity is going to have on social justice, environmentalism, and equality. They're not interested in Christianity because it's true, they're interested in Christianity because it's good. And it's your job to show them that it's good, so therefore you can convince them that it's true. Finally, you've got to know your target audience. How has your target audience been historically introduced to Christianity, and what would be some common objections that your target audience would have to Christian doctrine? If you're sharing your faith maybe in an Eastern European context, you might have to begin by convincing your audience that God is actually true. But if you're sharing your faith, say, in a Muslim context, you wouldn't so much be talking about whether God is true, but you'd be addressing why the God of Christianity is different from the beliefs of Islam. One group might believe that the Bible isn't trustworthy because the ancient manuscripts have all been corrupted, where another group don't know who Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are. Measuring your audience's familiarity with the Christian message is essential before beginning an appropriate evangelical presentation. Let's finish with some concluding points about worldview. We often hear discussions about the Christian worldview being the best or right worldview. While this may be true, it isn't the complete story. When Jesus himself preached, he preached to a collectivist, honor-shame culture that had social concerns and historical concerns that had to be addressed before he could complete his message. We see the Apostle Paul often would debate with Jews by assuming the authority of the Old Testament. But in other parts, he might debate with people who have no basis for a Christian worldview and they don't assume biblical authority, therefore he changes his approach. Presenting the gospel doesn't mean you have to transform someone's worldview. In fact, the ultimate kindness you can show is respecting their worldview and valuing what they have to say. It's not our job to transform a collectivist culture into an individualistic culture or vice versa. Rather, it's our job to figure out how we can present the gospel message to a collectivist culture in the best means possible. How do we do it? You decide.